forgotten town, there stands a library, ancient, heavy with silence, and deep within its walls lies a box, sealed away for decades. Inside journals, not of memory, but of prophecy. They spoke of fires before the flames began, of deaths before the bodies were found, of disappearances that no one could explain. And yet, there is one journal left unopened. The last journal. It does not whisper of the past. It tells of the day this town will fall. Completely. It is written, and nothing can be changed. So I ask you, if you held the book that could reveal the end of your world, would you dare to read it? It was late afternoon in Bellhaven, a small town hidden among silent hills and streets that seemed to move without hurry. The public library, inaugurated in 1923, had always been the intellectual heart of the place. But for many residents, it was also a building heavy with shadows. The oldest wing, a narrow corridor of tall shelves and low ceilings, remained almost always locked. People said the smell of mold and burnt paper clung to those walls, as if time itself had stopped there. Henry Mallory, librarian for more than 20 years, knew every corner of the building. Dedicated, meticulous, he believed books guarded secrets that went far beyond their pages. One September night, while organizing forgotten volumes in the old wing, his flashlight revealed an unusual gap in the wall, hidden behind a row of dusty encyclopedias. The sound came first, a faint rustling, like pages being turned by invisible hands. When he pulled the books aside, Henry discovered a dark wooden box, held closed only by a strip of brittle leather. Inside was a stack of journals bound in coarse fabric, each marked with dates ranging from the 1950s to the 1990s. The detail that made his breath falter was this. Though written by different people, the handwriting looked eerily the same. Curious, Henry opened the first notebook. On the first page, written in faded ink, it read, November 4th, 1952, the fire will begin at the theater at 8:13 p.m. The audience will have no chance to escape. Henry frowned. It seemed like a prediction, not an account. Still confused, he flipped through a few more pages and found detailed descriptions of accidents, disappearances, and murders he knew well from Bellhaven's history. The theater fire, the paper mill blaze, the unsolved murder of the Donnelly family. All recorded here, always dated before they happened. Henry's breathing grew heavy. The silence of the old wing seemed to swallow the sounds of the town outside. And then, as he closed the journal, he distinctly heard a whisper among the shelves. A low, drawn-out voice that seemed to seep straight from the paper. Read more, Henry. It isn't over. With trembling hands, he shoved the box back into the shelf's hollow. But deep down he knew it was already too late. The voices of the library had finally found a listener. That night, Henry Mallory returned home with his head burning. He tried to convince himself that the journals were nothing more than a morbid collection of local stories, maybe the work of someone obsessed with tragedy. But something gnawed at him. The dates always came before the events. Who could have written with such precision? The next day, before the library opened, Henry slipped back into the old wing. He locked the door behind him and laid the box on the reading table. The wood was worn, as though it had been opened and closed countless times. The air carried the smell of old paper mixed with something metallic, iron, perhaps blood. He chose the journal marked 1964. The first entry read, May 12th, the boy on the bicycle will never make it home. The river will claim him before sundown. Henry shivered. He checked the library's newspaper archives, and there it was. An article about a boy who had vanished, swept away by the Bellhaven River. The date and description matched perfectly. Turning the pages, more records revealed themselves. A bus accident in 1971. the disappearance of a schoolteacher in 1977, the orphanage fire in 1983, tragedies that still haunted the town's memory. Each word seemed written by someone who hadn't just witnessed the events but had foreseen them, in disturbing detail. Then Henry noticed something worse. Some entries didn't just describe the tragedies, they named the victims. Among them were people Henry himself had known. An old teacher, the daughter of a neighbor couple, even a policeman who sometimes visited the library. With trembling hands, Henry closed the journal. But his eyes were drawn to another volume, dated 1992. On the very first line, written in dark ink that looked almost fresh, he read, "September 15th, Henry Mallory will open this book, and when he does, he will hear my call." Henry's heart pounded. The journals didn't just record the past. They were writing the present. And in the suffocating silence of the old wing, Henry heard the whisper again, clearer this time, almost against his ear. "Keep reading. There is still so much to lose." The revelation that the journal spoke not only of the past but also of the present shook Henry Mallory to his core. He tried to ignore it, to lock the box away and continue with his routine as though nothing had happened. But the weight of discovery clung to him. Even the ordinary sounds of the library, the creak of wood, the pop of the heater, the rustle of turning pages, now felt uncanny, echoing from someplace not entirely of this world. And then the testimonies began to surface. Eleanor Whitmore had worked at the library for nearly 3 decades. Quiet, meticulous, she was known for keeping the historical archives and newspapers in flawless order. One afternoon, after closing, Henry cautiously mentioned the old wing. To his surprise, Eleanor froze. She set down the stack of newspapers she had been cataloging, turned to him, and asked in a low, almost fearful voice, "You've found the journals, haven't you?" Henry went cold. How could she know? Eleanor then told her own story. Back in the 1980s, when she was just an assistant, she had been tasked with storing boxes of documents from City Hall. While putting them away in the old wing, she heard a whisper. At first, she thought it was a lost visitor, but when she followed the sound, she discovered the same wooden box. Out of curiosity, she had opened one of the journals. The page she landed on spoke of an archivist who would discover truths she was never meant to know. What froze her blood, however, was the detail that followed. The description of her outfit that very day, a navy blue dress with pearl buttons. "I never touched those books again," Eleanor admitted, her eyes shimmering with tears. But the voices, they never stopped. Even without opening them, sometimes I hear my name whispered when I walk past that corridor. Henry's stomach turned to ice. He was not alone. The voices were real. Months later, a researcher named Thomas Grayson arrived in Bellhaven. He was studying the connection between urban legends and historical records in small towns. When he heard vague mentions of strange manuscripts in the Bellhaven library, he begged to see them. Against his better judgment, Henry let him consult one journal under close supervision. Thomas opened a volume from the 1970s and read aloud with a smirk. November 22nd, 1975. A curious researcher will lose himself in his own words. He laughed, brushing it off as coincidence. That night, though, at the inn where he was staying, Thomas felt a presence behind him. He later wrote to Henry that the pages of his notebook began turning by themselves, as if an unseen hand were rifling through his notes. The next day, he returned pale, with dark circles under his eyes. These journals, they aren't just records. They're portals. The more you read, the more they read you. He abandoned his research and fled town. Months later, Henry received a letter. Thomas described recurring nightmares. Whispers in languages he couldn't understand, shadows appearing in his room, and worst of all, New words scribbled into his notebook while he slept, in handwriting that wasn't his. The most disturbing testimony came from a veteran policeman, Daniel Reeves. He often visited the library to consult old newspapers. One evening, noticing Henry's exhaustion, Reeves pressed him for the truth. Worn down by secrecy, Henry reluctantly showed him a few passages. Reeves scoffed, flipping carelessly through the pages, until he stopped at an entry dated 1986. A policeman will find here the answer to a case he never solved. The color drained from Reeves's face. He had worked on the unsolved disappearance of a young woman named Claire Donovan. And here, in black and white, was a description of that night. The path she took to the bridge, the moment a hooded figure followed her. The journal even mentioned a detail Reeves had never shared with anyone. The killer wore a ring engraved with the local fraternity's insignia. Reeves had seen it under the streetlight that night and told no one. Slamming the journal shut, Reeves growled, "These books, they shouldn't exist. They know too much." He never returned to the library. Weeks later, Henry received a call. Reeves had been found dead in his home. The authorities ruled it a suicide. But on his desk, beside the gun, lay one of the library's journals. More stories piled up. Other staff admitted hearing footsteps when the library was empty. Researchers complained of losing all sense of time in the old wing. And in turn swore he saw a shadow turning pages on its own. With each testimony, Henry felt the weight of the voices grow heavier. It was as though the journals needed new readers, new eyes and minds to keep writing themselves. The nightmares worsened. He dreamed of walking through endless corridors lined with shelves, each book whispering his name. Whenever he tried to wake, he realized he was still inside the dream. One night, Henry woke with the certainty that someone had been in his house. On his desk lay a folded paper. In the same handwriting as the journals, it read, "Henry, you cannot escape what is already written." The more Henry investigated, the more he realized the journals didn't merely record or predict. They influenced. Every reading seemed to summon the tragedy closer, as though the act of knowing breathed life into the events. Eleanor said something that would echo in Henry's mind forever. "The library doesn't hold the journals, Henry. The journals hold the library." Thomas never answered Henry's last letter. Reeves's death was filed away as a suicide, though Henry knew the truth. And the voices no longer whispered. They commanded. Henry began to wonder, if the journals had already written the past and the present, how long before they began writing the immediate future? And worse still, whose future would it be? Winter came early to Bellhaven. The mornings were wrapped in thick fog, and the cold seemed to sink into the bones. For Henry Mallory, the season's weight was nothing compared to the burden he already carried. He was no longer simply the keeper of books in a quiet town. He was the unwilling guardian of something older, darker, and far heavier. The library's routine continued as though nothing were wrong. Children attended reading programs, students gathered references for their assignments, and elderly patrons revisited their past through yellowed newspapers. On the surface, everything was normal. Yet behind the locked door of the old wing, a box waited, a box that called to him. Henry knew he would not be able to resist forever. For weeks, Henry fought the temptation. He locked the old wing, avoided the corridor, and forced himself into endless cataloging work to drown the whispers. But the voices followed. They whispered at home. They invaded his dreams. Sometimes, in the middle of casual conversation, a second voice crept into his thoughts, interrupting him like a parasite. "You must keep reading, Henry. There is more to be written." At times he woke to find himself standing in the library, the box already on the table, the strap undone. He had no memory of how he'd arrived there. Fear gnawed at him. He was losing control. Eleanor noticed his pallor. One morning, she placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, her voice almost tender but weighted with dread. "They're choosing you." Henry didn't answer, but in his heart he knew she was right. One night in January, Henry surrendered. The whispers had become unbearable. He opened the box and lifted a newer journal, its leather darker than the rest. On its cover, 2001. The first entry described a fire in an apartment building, one that Henry remembered vividly. Families had lost everything, but as he turned the pages, his breath caught. February 2001. The librarian Henry Mallory will try to burn the journals, but fire will never consume them. His hands shook violently. It was mocking him. That night, Henry carried 2 journals to his backyard. He built a bonfire and cast them into the flames. The leather hissed, the ink bubbled, but when the fire died, the books lay untouched, blackened, yes, but whole. Then came the voices, no longer whispers, but a chorus. "You cannot destroy what has already been written." Henry collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, but the words came from inside him. The effects began to bleed beyond Henry. Visitors reported strange sensations in the old wing. A student claimed she felt someone breathing on her neck. An old man complained about hearing pages turning though no one was nearby. Henry feared his connection to the journals was infecting the entire library. Then came an unexpected visitor, Reverend Callahan. Callahan was a man of calm voice and firm presence. Entering the library, he went straight to Henry and said, "Someone came to me, saying you've disturbed things that should remain untouched." Henry hesitated, but in the Reverend's eyes he saw understanding. "The journals," Henry began, voice unsteady. "They don't just record, they predict, and they can't be destroyed." The Reverend was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "There are old stories about Bellhaven, about how this town was founded. Men who wanted prosperity struck a bargain. In return, they offered something, perhaps the future. These journals may be the proof." Henry's eyes widened. A bargain? Could the whole town be cursed by a choice made generations ago? "Whatever the truth," Callahan continued, "these books don't belong to you. They belong to the town, and perhaps to what created it." From then on, Henry was consumed by a tormenting dilemma. Reading the journals brought disaster closer. Ignoring them left him blind to what was coming. He began keeping notebooks of his own, recording patterns, victims, and connections. But soon he noticed something horrifying. His notebooks were changing. Words appeared in the margins, in handwriting that wasn't his. "Henry, don't fight us." Eleanor caught him one evening, scribbling furiously, eyes vacant. She realized with horror that his hand was moving on its own. "They're using you," she whispered. Henry resolved to end it. Gathering every journal into the old wing, he set candles in a circle. Eleanor, though terrified, stood with him. He opened the most recent journal and began reading aloud, as though daring the voices to reveal themselves. But as his words echoed, the candles sputtered out, one by one, plunging the room into darkness. Footsteps filled the air, not from the floor, not from the ceiling, but from everywhere. The journals opened themselves. Pages turned violently, fluttering like wings. The voices rose in unison. "We are not the past. We are not the future. We are what keeps Bellhaven alive." Henry cried out, "What do you want from me?" The answer was immediate, clear, and terrible. "Write with us." That night, Henry never returned home. Eleanor swore she saw him last in the candlelit room, surrounded by the open journals, his eyes wide and vacant. The next morning, the library was spotless. No wax, no journals, no sign of what had happened. Only the wooden box, shut tight, resting exactly where it had been found. And Henry Mallory was gone. Some said he fled. Others claimed he had gone mad and hidden away. But those who dared enter the old wing swore they heard his voice among the whispers, as if he had become just another page in an endless book. Henry Mallory's disappearance unsettled Bellhaven. To many residents, it was just another unexplained absence in a town long accustomed to tragedies and vanishing neighbors. But to those who had stepped into the shadows of the library, it was obvious. Henry hadn't simply left. He had been taken. The library remained open, now under the reluctant stewardship of Eleanor Whitmore. Yet from the night Henry vanished, the atmosphere inside changed. Silence grew heavier, as if the building itself breathed with its patrons. Lights flickered more often, and books were found misplaced with no record of borrowing. One morning, while organizing the old wing, Eleanor noticed something different. The wooden box where the journals had been kept looked larger. The leather strap was gone, replaced by a thin chain secured with a rusted padlock. Inside was only a single book. It was thicker than all the others, bound in dark crimson leather that seemed almost alive. No date was etched on the cover, only a line in golden letters. The last journal. Eleanor's hands trembled as she touched it. The leather was warm, almost pulsing, as though blood ran beneath it. She recoiled, but the whisper returned, soft and insistent. "Open it. The town must know." For days, Eleanor resisted, but the weight was too much to bear alone. She called together a small group of confidants to meet in secret within the library's walls. Reverend Callahan, who had once warned of Bellhaven's founding pact. Martha Donnelly, descendant of the family murdered in the 1960s. Officer Karen Reeves, daughter of the policeman Daniel Reeves, whose death had been branded a suicide. When Eleanor revealed the chained box and the crimson book, silence swallowed the room. The Reverend spoke first. "This isn't just a record. This is the final contract." Everyone stared at one another. Eleanor explained her fear. This book did not contain ordinary entries. It might hold not just isolated tragedies, but the fate of the entire town. With hesitant hands, Eleanor unlocked the chain and opened the first page. The handwriting was the same as the other journals, but sharper, etched as if carved into the fibers. Bellhaven was born of the bargain of 12 men. Prosperity in exchange for pain. Each generation would pay with blood, and each tragedy would feed the town. But the time of final payment is near. The following pages cataloged every catastrophe from the earlier journals. The theater fire, the bridge collapse, the orphanage blaze, disappearances one after another, all laid out like chapters of a debt collected across decades. Then the tone shifted. On November 12, 2025, Bellhaven's tribute will no longer be taken in the blood of a few. The tribute will be of all. The town will collapse upon itself. No resident will survive to tell. Martha Donnelly dropped the book. Officer Reeves paled. The Reverend closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. This is the end of Bellhaven, Eleanor breathed. That night, Eleanor dreamed vividly. She wandered through the streets of Bellhaven, but everything lay in ruins. Houses burned. The river overflowed. Screams echoed in the distance. And at every corner sat Henry Mallory, hunched over a journal, writing endlessly. His eyes were black voids, empty, and when Eleanor approached, he looked up and said, "It is written. Nothing can be changed." She woke with tears on her face, but also with resolve. She had to try. With Callahan, Martha, and Karen, She devised a desperate plan to destroy the last journal before the appointed date. No matter how the earlier volumes had resisted, they believed this one might be different. They chose Halloween night for the attempt. With the town distracted by festivities, perhaps the journal's hold would be weakened. Armed with tools, gasoline, and crosses, they gathered in the old wing and placed the crimson book on the table. The whisper filled the air. If you burn the book, you burn with it. The fire will not choose. The Reverend's hand trembled as he held the gasoline. Martha steadied him. If that's the price, we'll pay it. But we won't let Bellhaven be devoured. The moment the match was struck, the library groaned. Shelves rattled. Bulbs shattered. The floor shook like the onset of an earthquake. The last journal flew open, pages filling with words as if written in real time. They try to erase the inevitable. They choose fire, and fire will take them. Flames spread not over the book, but across the walls and ceiling. The journal itself remained untouched, glowing faintly in the inferno. Karen screamed for everyone to flee. Martha tried to shut the box, but the leather strap snapped in her hands. The Reverend fell to his knees, praying aloud. Eleanor, choking in the smoke, saw the impossible. The pages now depicted exactly what they were living, recording each gesture, each cry, line by line. By dawn, neighbors found the library intact from the outside. Yet the old wing was blackened, charred beyond recognition. None of the four were ever found. No bodies, no ash, nothing. Only the box sitting once again on the shelf. And inside, the last journal, pristine, untouched. On its first page was now a fresh entry, written in dark ink. November 12th, 2025. The town will witness its own ruin. And though warned, none will believe. Since that night, rumors have spread. Some say they hear Eleanor's screams when passing the library after dark. Others claim Henry's voice lingers in the wind, begging someone to keep writing. The last journal remains locked away, but everyone knows it waits, and the date draws near. What will happen to Bellhaven? Will it prove to be only a tale meant to frighten? Or will the town be swallowed whole by its own story? The question haunts every resident who dares think about it. If you held in your hands the journal that foretells your city's destruction, would you dare open it? If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.